Part 2 of the history of Jerusalem in art, realities and fantasies, how art reveals the historic multiculturalism of Jerusalem, by Jacqueline Taylor Basker, from medieval to Ottomans. The Umayyads lose control of Jerusalem under Marwan II after years of rioting and in Jerusalem and other Syrian cities. And they were defeated in battle by the Abbasids in 750, who took control of the entire empire, including Jerusalem. Marwan flees, but is assassinated in Egypt. Here's the Christian version showing the Caliph as subservient to Charlemagne, and here's the Muslim version showing the Abbasid Caliph giving orders. However, in 878, the Tulunids overthrow the Abbasids, and then the Abbasids regain control. But in 969, the Fatimids take Jerusalem. Unfortunately, there arose a Fatimid caliph claiming to be the descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. He was a controversial character, seen either as a mad tyrant and irrational killer of his enemies, or by others as the ideal supreme ruler divinely ordained. He came to power early at only 11 years of age and became fanatically religious and implemented a harsh series of laws, including forbidding women from leaving their houses and forbidding cobblers to make shoes for them so they could leave. And he began a policy of killing all dogs. He forbade the drinking of beer and wine, which had been popular in Egypt. He completed his amazing mosque in Cairo. However, he ordered the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, as well as most churches and synagogues in Jerusalem. Some thought this was trying to make up for the rumor that his mother was actually a Christian. One day he rode his horse out of a gate of Cairo, never to be seen again. Some thought he was murdered, others thought he had become immortal. His son, Ali al-Zahir, allows the rebuilding of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and other Christian churches with a treaty with the Byzantines. The Byzantine emperor, who at that time was an empress, Empress Zoe, who ruled with her 3 husbands, paid for the restoration of the Holy Sepulchre, and merchants built hospitals and monasteries. Jerusalem gets captured by the Seljuk Turks in 1073. It revolts against them, but then the emir retakes the city and massacres the inhabitants. Over 3,000 people were killed, including Muslims, Jews, and Christians. At this point, the Christian emperor of Byzantium appealed for help from the Western churches. The Pope at the time, Pope Urban II, was busy reforming the church from clerical abuses, but gathered hundreds of clerics and noblemen in France and delivered a rousing speech, summoning both rich and poor to stop their infighting and join a religious war to help their fellow Christians in the Middle East and take back Jerusalem. Christians could no longer travel safely on pilgrimage to holy sites, and there were stories about Muslim violence towards Christians, some of which were fake news, designed as propaganda to support the Crusades. He also promised absolution and remission of sins for all those who died in the service of Christ. Altogether, between 60,000 and 100,000 responded to his call to march on Jerusalem. Although by that time the Fatimids had been conquered by the Mamluks, who tried to make peace. But the Crusaders were intent on war and conquest of Jerusalem. And they conquered Jerusalem 2 weeks before Urban died in 1099. It was the first of 7 major military campaigns fought over the next 200 years, known as the Crusades. Geoffrey of Bouillon establishes the first kingdom of Jerusalem after the crusade that lasted from 1099 to 1187. After the battle, he walked barefoot in his undergarments to pray at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in repentance. He refused to wear a gold crown where Christ had worn a crown of thorns in the city. However, many Jews and Arab Eastern Christians were killed during the conquest, and many Jews killed en route by the Crusaders, who often were blamed for the Black Death. The Crusades interrupted twice the Muslim rule over Jerusalem that lasted over 1,300 years, ending after World War I and the defeat of the Ottomans. The Crusader rule lasted for almost 200 years. Baldwin I outwits the papacy and becomes the king of Jerusalem. He prohibits non-Catholic worship. During the First Crusader Kingdom, the Dome of the Rock was turned into a church. The Al-Aqsa Mosque became the royal palace of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The Knights Templar was founded in Al-Aqsa Mosque. Prominent Jews visit Jerusalem: the poet Yehuda Halevi, the philosopher Maimonides, and the traveler Benjamin of Tuleda. He described it as a small city full of Jacobites, Armenians, Greeks, and Georgians. Only 200 Jews dwelt in a corner under the Tower of David. The First Kingdom lasted from 1099 to 1187, but was destroyed by Saladin, the leader of the Ayyubids. Saladin decided to invade after Chantillion, a very cruel crusader, massacred several dozen Muslim pilgrims in cold blood just because they stepped into his area en route. This so maddened Sultan Saladin of the Saracens that he vowed revenge. Note this painting by the French Fragonard showing dead women and babies, European propaganda, anti-Islamic propaganda, because Saladin was actually quite humane. During the siege, citizens could leave if they paid a ransom. The leader Balian's family was given safe passage out. He allowed Jewish and Orthodox settlements. He freed the Muslim slaves, and the Dome of the Rock went back to Islam. Native Christians could stay. Christians of Crusader origin could leave with ransom. 15,000 poor Christians, however, were sold into slavery, but the Crusaders left with much treasure. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre was reopened after 3 days, and pilgrims were allowed in with a fee. Orthodox Copts and Jacobites were allowed to remain, and the control of the churches and holy sites went to the Orthodox. Here's a medieval view of the city by Jean Millot. In 212, 300 rabbis from England and France made Aliyah and settled in Jerusalem. Outside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Saladin built Omar's Mosque to commemorate Omar's decision to pray outside of the church and leave it as a Christian site out of respect. Saladin shamed the ruthless Crusaders by treating the city with kindness and keeping every promise he made to the people. Islam controlled Jerusalem from that day until the 20th century. In 1193, Saladin's son founded and endowed Islamic Waqf, or religious property, dedicated to Moroccan immigrants next to the Jewish quarter, and which was formed when Jews were allowed to settle in Jerusalem. It also contained a law school and a hospice for newly arrived immigrants. By the 14th century, there were 3 waqfs for the Moroccans, and schools and mosques also flourished. The Moroccan quarter's homes bordered the Western Wall. Jews at that time prayed in the synagogues or sometimes on the Mount of Olives for public occasions. But after the Six-Day War in 1967, the Moroccan quarter, including the historic Sheikh Eid Mosque of Saladin, was demolished. There was no official authorization and no paper trail of perpetrators. However, several took credit, including Jerusalem Mayor Teddy Kollek and Moshe Dayan, and David Ben-Gurion, who also wanted to demolish Jerusalem's walls since they were not Jewish. In all, 135 houses were demolished, and many historic buildings were destroyed. 650 people were given a few minutes to evacuate their homes, and afterwards they were not given permission to retrieve their personal property. Many refused to budge. One elderly woman and 3 children were killed as their homes were bulldozed over them. Many of the refugees emigrated to Morocco with Jordan's help, or resettled in the Shuafat refugee camp in Jerusalem, which is still crowded and restrictive, or went to other parts of Jerusalem. Now the Western Wall is the Wailing Wall, and the plaza was doubled in length and now functions as an open-air synagogue of 20,000 square meters. Now it is the site of conflict between ultra-Orthodox Jews and other Jews, including female Jews. Here's Anat Hoffman, head of the Women of the Wall, with thousands of ultra-Orthodox girls protesting against her. Here ultra-Orthodox men protest against Women of the Wall's prayer service. And here's Rabbi Noah Sata with scratches on her face from ultra-Orthodox protesters at the Western Wall. Israel told the UN that the site was demolished after the Jordanian government had allowed it to become a slum. The Muslims dismantled the walls about 26 years after the Moroccan quarter was built, although the Crusaders again threatened Jerusalem. The Ayyubid Sultan of Damascus ordered the walls dismantled, leaving the city defenseless in 1219. Frederick II, leading the Sixth Crusade in 1227, marches to Jerusalem. Al-Kamil Saladin's descendant peacefully surrendered Jerusalem in 1228 to the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick during the Sixth Crusade. A diplomatic treaty was signed, giving Jerusalem to Crusaders for 10 years, while Muslims keep control of their holy places. No walls were to be rebuilt, but after the 10 years were up, Frederick ordered them rebuilt, but without his former formidable army, the walls were demolished by the Emir of Karak the same year. The Treaty of 1229 between Frederick and Al-Kamil was unique in the history of the Crusades. By diplomacy alone, and without major military confrontation, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and a corridor running to the sea were ceded to the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The Muslims retained their homes, property, and holy places, as well as their own city officials, to administer their justice system and safeguard their religious interests. St. Francis, 10 years before, in 1219, accompanied by another friar and hoping to convert the Sultan of Egypt or win martyrdom in the attempt, crossed the Muslim battle lines with the Crusaders and met with Al-Kamil as Sultan of Egypt, staying in his camp 2 days. The two had long conversations. People speculate that this may have contributed to the nonviolent resolution of the dispute over Jerusalem. Exactly 800 years later, after St. Francis, Pope Francis traveled to the UAE and met with the Abu Dhabi Crown Prince in the interests of peace and understanding. In 1244, a Turkic people, the Khwarezmians, retook the city from the Crusaders, allied with the Ayyubids. However, 2 years later, the Ayyubids were back in control, and Crusader influence was ended. Unsuccessfully, the Crusaders tried again to capture Jerusalem in the Seventh Crusade, and their leader, Louis IX, was captured in Egypt. He died in Tunis on the next and last crusade, along with most of his army, of dysentery. Here's a tapestry showing the Crusaders reaching Jerusalem. The Crusaders produced artwork that revealed both the brutal realities and Western fantasies of Crusader warfare. This tapestry was based on the epic poem Jerusalem Liberated by Tasso. It shows the Crusaders in classical armor, calmly reaching the city, with Joffrey of Bouillon kneeling and the walls of Jerusalem in the background. All is serene and noble. However, these paintings, medieval painting of Crusader battle, probably more accurately display the brutality, chaos, and bloody scenes of Crusader battles. This pyxis, which is a box for Eucharist wafers, depicts standing saints or ecclesiastics and the entry into Jerusalem with Christ riding a donkey, made of hammered brass and laid with silver, from Syria. Crusader art reflected the significant cultural exchange between Eastern Christian and Islamic art styles and the West. The reality was that Jerusalem was a center for many diverse traditions, East and West. For example, Syrian gold workers worked on the right of this Holy Sepulchre market, while the Latin gold workers were on the left. Both produced metalwork that combined Islamic aesthetics with Christian subjects, as in this piece which underscores the multiculturalism of the region. Luxurious inlaid brasses signed Al-Mawsuli from Mosul were popular in both Christian and Muslim courts, and often combined Christian and Muslim iconography. Used as prestigious diplomatic gifts or luxury exports, they traveled beyond the Seljuk world as far west to Europe. This famous Basker reveals the convergence of Byzantine style with Islamic decoration and shows figures from court life, camels, hunters, musicians, dancers, and drinking revelers. The Ayyubids are defeated by the Mamluks in Egypt and retreat to Damascus and control a small empire, including Jerusalem. But in 1258, the Mongols raid the Middle East, invade Jerusalem, and ally with the Nestorian Christians and France. However, in 1260, the Egyptian Mamluks defeat the Mongolians at the Battle of Ain Jalut, and Jerusalem is renovated despite ongoing Mongol raids in the region. The Mamluks are great builders in Jerusalem. Here is the Ashrafia Madrasa, a school. The Armenians built a wall around their quarter. Here the gray areas are however, claimed to be Israel, to be part of the Jewish quarter. Although when the Armenians built the wall there were only 2 Jewish families living in Jerusalem. The Black Death hits Jerusalem and other cities in the Mamluk Sultanate in 1347, and the Jews are blamed for it, and many Jews in Europe are burned and killed. However, the official church did not blame them, but they had to wear yellow badges. In 1377, Jerusalem and other cities revolt, but the revolt is quelled. In 1392, King Henry IV of England makes a pilgrimage. And Felix Fabri, a German Dominican priest, took a pilgrimage to Mount Sinai to visit the remains of his spiritual wife, St. Catherine of Alexandria, who was martyred and whose relics were scattered throughout the Middle East. Here's a picture of her martyrdom. And Felix, though, found that The relics of her body were missing on his pilgrimage. They were stolen. He tries to discover the thief and save his saintly wife from such a brutal fate, but he fails. And very discouraged when he describes Jerusalem as a collection of all manner of abominations. And he listed Saracens, Greeks, Syrians, Jacobites, Abyssinians, Nestorians, Armenians, Gregorians, Maronites, Tucumans, Bedouins, Assassins, a sect possibly Druses, Mamelukes, and the most accursed of all, Jews. He reports that only the Latin Christians long with all their hearts for Christian princes to come and subject all of the country to the authority of Rome. However, Selim I declares himself caliph, and in 1516 the Ottomans replace the Mamluks. Thus, the Ottomans begin 400 years of rule of Jerusalem. See what happens next in part 3 of this video series.